Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a stack of sources, distill the signal from the noise, and, really give you the shortcut to being well informed.
And today we are tearing into one of the most consequential eras in modern American politics.
Absolutely. The fundamental shift that took place during the 1960s and 70s, the one that ultimately paved the road for the Reagan Revolution.
The massive story.
It is. So our mission today is to understand that precise mix of forces. You have economic turmoil, deep cultural battles, brilliant political strategy, all of it.
Right. All the things that allowed the conservative movement to rise up and really challenge that liberal dominance that had been entrenched, since the New Deal.
We're going to try to get beneath the surface and see how this whole political realignment was engineered.
And this story, it really revolves around one central conflict, doesn't it?
I think so.
You have conservatives who wanted to drastically limit the power, the scope of the federal government, especially on economic policy, social spending. And at the same time, they were reacting so strongly against what they saw as moral and cultural disintegration.
A complete rejection of the Great Society, civil rights, the counterculture, all of it.
It was a direct contrast.
And what's key, I think, and what our sources really show is the framing. The messaging often presented liberalism not just as, bad policy.
No, it was much deeper than that.
It was presented as morally corrosive, as intrusive, an existential threat to things like the traditional family or religious values.
A defensive social order, really.
Exactly. Okay, so let's unpack how they built the infrastructure to fight that battle.
To understand the victory, you absolutely have to look at the organizational work they did. The infrastructure they painstakingly constructed during what were, initially very lean years for them.
Right. We have to start with those foundational figures who built what they called the New Right. And that begins, kind of ironically, with a massive electoral defeat.
Barry Goldwater in 1964. Goldwater's a bit of a paradox. He suffered this spectacular loss, but he energized a whole new type of activist.
Centered on what? Limited government, free markets.
Right. Strict limited government, free market economics, anti-communism. But the real strategic insight here, the thing that lasted, was that his campaign created this massive, crucial grassroots infrastructure.
You're talking about the mailing lists.
The mailing lists. His 1964 fundraising established the very first comprehensive direct mail database. And the New Right used that for decades to just bypass the moderate Republican establishment.
And activate their voters directly.
Exactly. So the loss was truly a database win.
And while that's happening, you have the intellectual heavy lifting being done by William F. Buckley and his National Review.
Buckley was the ideological architect. He brought coherence to all these disparate conservative ideas, and crucially, he performed this act of intellectual legitimacy.
How so?
He did it by actively criticizing and pushing out the radical fringe elements, like the John Birch Society. That helped position mainstream conservatism as serious, intellectual, and, ready for power.
Okay, so the ideology is coherent. Now they need to mobilize and strategize.
And this is where the organizations become the engine. You have the Young Americans for Freedom, YAF, mobilizing college students, cultivating a whole generation of activists around those core values.
But the real operational genius, for me, that emerges in Washington, we have to talk about the professionalizing bodies, the American Conservative Union, and particularly the Heritage Foundation.
Right. The ACU professionalized the lobbying and the political coordination. But Heritage pioneered a whole new approach to the think tank model.
They didn't just write academic papers.
Not at all. They created detailed, ready-to-implement policy manifestos. They called them briefcase policies.
Meaning they were ready to go.
Ready to go. The goal was to produce specific regulations, specific laws, before a conservative administration took office. That way they could bypass bureaucratic delays and just hit the ground running.
That is a phenomenal strategic nugget. So they were basically operationalizing ideology.
Perfectly put.
And the proof that a conservative platform could finally win, that came with Richard Nixon. He showed the electoral appeal.
He did. He consolidated the moderate conservatives and then strategically appealed to the silent majority.
With those messages of law and order and hardline anti-communism, he showed the movement how to build a winning coalition.
Nixon tapped into that feeling of anxiety, but it was really the 1970s. That decade truly created the necessary catastrophic conditions for the New Right to gain traction.
What's fascinating here is that the foundation for this resurgence was just a profound collapse of public trust.
A total collapse of confidence in the federal government's ability to solve
Yes.
anything.
And nothing shattered that trust, especially economic trust, like the crisis of the 70s. We weren't just in a recession. We were dealing with stagflation.
That painful mix of high inflation, high unemployment, and stagnant growth that just went on for years.
Right.
And this is where the ideological damage was done. Stagflation was so devastating because it directly contradicted the prevailing liberal economic theory at the time.
Keynesian economics.
Keynesian economics. The idea that government could manage the economy by trading inflation for employment, or vice versa, stagflation just, it proved that government couldn't manage the economy under the old rules.
So government intervention started to look not just ineffective, but actually counterproductive.
Especially when you add in the oil embargoes, the energy crises. It was a mess.
So if the government can't secure the economy, then came the political blow, Watergate.
Between 72 and 74, yeah. Culminating in Nixon's resignation, it absolutely shattered public confidence in the presidency itself.
It fueled this massive, lasting skepticism toward pretty much all government institutions.
Which made the conservative message of limited power and institutional restraint incredibly appealing.
And let's not forget foreign policy failures. I mean, the Iran hostage crisis, 79 to 81.
144 days.
52 Americans held hostage for 444 agonizing days, followed by failed rescue attempts under President Carter. It just emphasized U.S. vulnerability, governmental weakness.
A general lack of order on the world stage.
Yeah.
It fueled this powerful demand for a return to strength and, moral clarity.
Okay, so we've got economic chaos, political failure, this profound government distrust.
So if the government in Washington can't fix our economy or secure our hostages, where did voters turn for a sense of order and certainty?
They turned inward.
Exactly. The focus shifted dramatically from the failed policies of Washington to defending the fundamental moral and social values they felt were threatened right at home.
And that provided the perfect opening for the cultural clashes to take center stage.
And that became the gasoline that fueled the conservative grassroots mobilization.
Let's talk about the battle over women's roles. That's a perfect case study.
It is. Liberals wanted the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, to guarantee equal legal rights regardless of sex. And this was supposed to be a simple ratification after passing Congress.
But it met this intense, highly organized conservative opposition.
Famously led by Phyllis Schlafly and her Stop ERA campaign.
Right. And she argued that the ERA was not about equality, but about undermining traditional, stable family roles.
She said it would lead to drafting women, to unisex bathrooms, the end of alimony. It was a very effective campaign.
And the failure of the ERA to get ratified was a massive, tangible victory for grassroots conservatism.
It was. It demonstrated that cultural anxiety was a powerful political organizing tool. It showed conservatives they could win by tapping into those fears about the changing social order.
Another really complex flashpoint was affirmative action.
Liberals argued it was essential to remedy historical racial discrimination, promote inclusion.
And the conservative counterargument, which was really fueled by this feeling that white working-class voters were being ignored by Washington.
All right. They branded it as reverse discrimination.
And that tension plays out in the Supreme Court. The Bake case in 1978.
Regents of the University of California v. Bake. And the decision was nuanced but critical. It prohibited the use of rigid racial quotas in admissions.
But, and this is the key takeaway, it allowed race to be used as one factor among many.
Exactly. It showed the new right's growing influence in shaping policy limits, in injecting their narrative into the judicial process.
And finally, the ongoing cultural liberalization around LGBTQ+ rights. The push for legal protections was met with, with intense backlash.
Intense, organized conservative backlash, led by religious figures like Anita Bryant. This resistance revealed a really deep cultural divide over sexual morality.
And it successfully mobilized conservative voters around those traditional social values. The argument was they were defending the innocence of children, the sanctity of the family.
So if the external crises were the backdrop and social issues were the fuel, what was the trigger?
We need to talk about the trigger. What was the single crucial catalyst that unified all these disparate cultural anxieties into one cohesive political movement?
It had to be the legalization of abortion in Roe v. Wade, 1973.
That decision was the lightning rod.
Absolutely. It galvanized the previously fragmented community of Protestant evangelicals, and suddenly for them, political engagement wasn't optional anymore. It was a moral imperative.
And this prompted conservative churches to actively merge faith with politics,
creating a powerful, single-issue voting bloc They successfully positioned conservatives as the ultimate defenders of moral order against what they saw as liberal permissiveness.
And that brought millions of new voters into the Republican column.
It really did.
So this is where we see that fusion of organizational infrastructure and faith. We need to talk about the key figures and organizations who manage this, the political strategists and the media masters.
You have to start with the organizers. Jerry Falwell and the Moral Majority, founded in '79, they explicitly fused Christian faith and conservative politics, rallying voters around opposition to abortion, school prayer, sexual permissiveness.
And they were just masters of leveraging broadcast technology.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
James Dobson with Focus on the Family. His radio programs reached millions of homes. He was advocating for family-centered policies and effectively mobilizing evangelicals politically across state lines.
Then you had Pat Robertson and the 700 Club.
Right, expanding that evangelical influence even further by combining religious broadcasting with pointed political commentary.
But we can't forget the political coordination aspect of it.
No. Paul Weyrich was the essential political strategist. He co-founded the Moral Majority and successfully coordinated this evangelical activism into a coherent, organized movement designed to influence policy and elections.
And figures like Billy Graham also played a significant role, advising presidents, reinforcing the legitimacy of the religious right in mainstream policy discussions.
The overall strategy was just devastatingly effective. A sophisticated network of media, churches, and grassroots organizations provided the essential, durable foundation for the political power they would wield in the 1980s and beyond.
So the conservative resurgence was really a perfect storm.
It really was. It began as a philosophical reaction to the social revolutions of the 60s, but it was just powerfully amplified, brought to a boil by the instability of the 70s, the economic failures of stagflation, the profound political failures of Watergate, Iran. The timing was everything.
So when you put all those things together, the economic distress, the institutional distrust, and this carefully targeted cultural anxiety, it created the ideal moment for the new right to seize the reins of the Republican Party.
It really did.
This whole era laid the ideological groundwork for the Reagan Revolution. It demonstrated the immense potency of combining sophisticated organization, religious activism, and cultural conservatism in American politics.
So what does this all mean for you today?
I think it means that the strategic political infrastructure built during this period, think tanks like the Heritage Foundation creating ready-made policy, conferences like CPAC, the durable political mobilization of the religious right.
Right. It all secured a lasting, non-negotiable influence for the conservative movement. That framework continues to shape national policy today.
You might consider how the core themes debated in the 1970s, specifically that balance between individual autonomy and traditional social order, remain absolutely central to our current political debates.
And they're utilizing the very same institutional networks established all those decades ago.
A lasting, tactical triumph of organization. Thank you for diving deep with us.